power brokers, the while of power will fall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metsa. I have a great guest on tonight. Keith Secola is a Native American musician, grew up on the Iron Range. He's an accomplished artist. He's garnered awards and accolades as a musician, a singer, a songwriter, a composer, and a producer. He is highly skilled with the guitar, flute, mandolin, banjo, harmonica, and piano, and has played in venues from Denmark to the walls of the Grand Canyon. He's got an incredible career. He played at the Olympic Games in Atlanta in 1996, at the Olympic Games in Salt Lake City in 2002. Among other things, he also played at the grand opening gala at the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian. He's performed in concert with everybody from Neil Young to U2. Most recently, he was nominated for Best Song Written and Recorded for Television for the Guild of Music Supervisors and rocked a live show in Hollywood, California at the Wiltern Theater with no less than John Densmore of The Doors on drums. Keith and I grew up in the same territory. He used to play in a band with my brother John called the Schwartz Brothers, rocking the Bon Air Bar in Mountain Iron, Minnesota every now and then. Ironically named because back then people smoked in bars and they smoked a lot. I just was able to sit in with Keith. He had a great new record out called Ranger. We performed together at the West Theater about a month ago. He's got a handful of shows coming up on his Ancestral Fire Tour, the Minnesota Tour 2026 with Gary Farmer. They're playing on March 12th at the Chair Lyric Center in Virginia, at the River Folk School, the Rife Center in Grand Rapids, and at the Ice House in Minneapolis. I will tell you more about that as the show goes on. But without any further ado, I'd like to welcome my old friend, Keith Secola. Keith, how are you today?
It's a good day down in the Valley of the Sun, Tempe, Arizona. And like we say, it's good to be here. It's good to be anywhere. And so, it's a nice day to be alive.
Well,
the blood moon last night, seen the blood moon. I got up early just so I could see it. And I love the blood moon. It kind of reminds you the dimensions like a marble in the sky rather than a flat surface. And that eclipse of the moon and the color was just magnificent.
Well, you speak of magnificent. My brother John called me yesterday and said you had an amazing time out in Hollywood, California. Tell us about what you were nominated for. Tell us about the show and where the song appeared on which television show.
Okay, the song appeared on this Netflix series called Dark Winds. And that's what the nomination was for by the music supervisors, the Guild of Music Supervisors, for Best Song on TV. There was another number of people in our category, and we were asked to play during the awards ceremony, and so we got ourselves in front of the people that make the music in movies and TV, including the people from the Sinners soundtrack. Last year was an Oscar winning for the best sound, Gustavson, for the best sound in on the motion screen. And it was a wonderful evening, even like the performer John Tesh, a piano player. We talked a lot. He's a good guy. A lot of Hollywood hadn't seen us or heard of our genre. I call it Native Americana. And so we got exposed, and like you mentioned, John Densmore was on the drums. We had a rehearsal at his house on Friday. He lives in Santa Monica, and he's a wonderful brother, and he's still got his chops, man, and he takes care of himself, and he's very vibrant still, and he's a music history in himself. He'll talk about the old Doors songs and the creation of them, and I always get a story about that from him. And so it was just a wonderful event. We had a violinist, Genevieve. We had another wonderful percussionist, Beth Goodfellow. She tours with national acts. She was just there and happened to join us. And it was just a great event. The music supervisor, Rick Clark from Dark Winds, he's a avid bass player, and so he played bass for us. And we had a wonderful band, very dynamic, our sound. We started off with a little flute solo. I'll play 10 seconds of this. So we started off with a little bit of space and a violin and created the mood and the atmosphere in a big theater, big sound. And then we went into the rock version of NDN Cars. I got to play a telly during it, so I got to play some leads and things and get a little bit of grit in the song. We had Dave Hochfeld from Minneapolis came out and played rhythm guitar and sang. And it was just, we had a hoop dancer, Eric Hernandez, who he really gave it, the show over the top. So it was very visual for the audience to see that. And I was just kind of jazzed about it and did a lot of networking. I have a manager. He was with me, Howard Cohen. He worked with Mickey Hart and the Grateful Dead. And so it was good to have a little bit of management out there. And we went out there as a team and we prayed for the people. So it was a really powerful event. I'm still kind of jazzed about it. And I think, now I kind of know the underlings of music placement in TVs and how it gets placed in movies and things like that. And I got exposed to terms like music supervisor. What is a music supervisor? What's a showrunner, et cetera, kind of stuff like that. And for me, it was eye-opening, and I was very humbled by the whole process, but very confident in the song. Like Dylan said, I know my song well before I start singing, and that's what we did.
Boy, that sounds like just you were firing on all cylinders. It sounds like.
Yeah, we had like I say, we had a rehearsal at John's house the night before, and we rehearsed the song several times and talked about the arrangement, and then we played songs like "Light My Fire" and some of my blues songs. Yeah, I always play with John. We get a kick out of that, and we do "Riders on the Storm" and some of the Doors stuff, but. John's an avid jazz player, and he listens to a lot of Spanish music now, even though he doesn't understand it. He loves it,
Right.
Yeah, and so we had a lot of fun with our group, and we really listened to each other, and we were very dynamic during the song. We had a little drum breakdown so the drummers could be featured, and when I mentioned his name, the auditorium erupted, like, oh, that's John. He's living and still playing music. And I kind of have to honor him and also all the band members that were in the band. And so our dressing room was right upstairs from Brittany Howard was in the other part of the dressing room. So I got to talk to her a little bit, talk about music. And, like Raphael Sadil, he wrote the song, I Lied to You. It's on the Sinners soundtrack. And he was there, and John Legend was there. So it was a start thing, and they took care of us pretty good. They knew who we were, and so I think I made inlays into it. But I also represented the Native American culture and people in a real positive way, presented our culture without any grandiosing or anything like that. It was just a very, like I say, a very humble but confident performance. And so I'm a jazz, and then I got to go to the ocean. My friend Rick Clark, the bass player, but also the music supervisor from Dark Winds, he was staying at a hotel near me at Marina Del Rey, and he was the TV series called Abbott Elementary. They rented the whole hotel for a week, and they were doing their rap sessions and getting the last episodes. And so I got to meet some of the people on there, ate in their catering, etc. kind of thing. Did the True Iron Range thing, we're kind of pirates. And, we took advantage like we belong here.
Well, you do belong. You worked very hard, Keith Secola. Keith, how did you meet John Densmore?
I was doing on my wife's reservation in Fort Duchesne, Utah. We were doing a show for the youth a long time ago, and he was brought there by another friend. And we connected. That was over 20 years ago. And we remained in good friends. And he recorded a couple of songs for me a while back, and I recorded him maybe 10, 15 years ago. We did this Peter Lafarge song called Drums. And Peter was quite an artist, quite a writer. Johnny Cash covered his songs called Bitter Tears in the early 60s. He released a kind of a protest Native American album out, and Peter Lafarge was one of the writers. Peter was friends with Dylan, John Lennon, and people like that. And he wrote in the old folk style, kind of crude, kind of just getting the words out there. And I covered one of his songs called Crimson Parsons, kind of redid it in a country version, country folk. And John, when we recorded a tribute album to Peter, I had John do the vocals, and Floyd Westerman, who you know,
yes,
did vocals on it. And so I got John in the studio, and he was really excited about that because it was the first time he was in there since the Doors. He was really proud of the fact that he brought his sizzle cymbal, and he goes, "I haven't played this since Riders on a Storm," And he had like little things like that, and a little bit of rock memorabilia, and so it was classic. But it's called Drums, and then a few years later we released a LP, a 2-song LP, where Drums is on one side, and there was an unreleased Doors song called Ghost Dance. Was a Jim Morrison Doors release that never got released, and we put that out and pressed it on vinyl, and that's out there. It's out there. So that's how I met John, and I just spent the night at his house, and during the morning, I did a little bit of writing, and then we went into his little office where he got his drum kit set up, and we worked on another song that I got coming out called Sweet Puerto Rico in 6/8 time. John loves 6/8 time. He thinks 4/4 is kind of boring, but he loves 6/8. And when I told him it was in 6/8, he go, let's go in the office, Keith. And we went and jammed out on the song a little bit.
Well, 3/4 and 6/8 because you grew up on the Iron Range and heard your share, like myself, of polka bands. We've got Keith Secola on for the whole show. We're going to listen to probably one of his most beloved songs called NDN Cars. Not spelled Indian, it's NDN Cars. That was the song that was nominated for the best television song and for the show in Hollywood that we were just talking about. And then we'll have Keith on for the rest of the show on the Wall of Power, a radio hour.
Is this a tape? I've been driving in my NDN car, to the pound of the wheels drumming in my brain. My dash is dusty, my plates are expired. Please, Mr. Officer, let me explain. I got to make it to a powwow tonight. I'll be singing 49 down by the river.
If you hear those lovely voices by the divas, you'll know you're listening to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. Keith Secola, my guest, is laughing because you know all those women.
Yeah, and I love it. Wall of Power. It sounds like that, the wall of sound, great, it was symbolic of the Grateful Dead's sound equipment, the wall of sound that was kind of ahead of its time back in the day.
My very first Grateful Dead show, Keith, in 1973 was at the St. Paul Civic Center, and they had the wall of sound. It looked like the sonic version of the Great Pyramids.
Yeah.
There was
the sound company was called Ultrasound. And I remember when I wasn't aware of it back at that time, but I think I was at one of them shows maybe in 74 when they had it at the Met. Remember the Met down in Bloomington? And all of the Iron Rangers from the Schwartz Brothers, we went down there and stayed at the Alamo for a couple of days. And the Alamo was a place where kind of an Iron Range refuge where some guys were staying. The house looked like the Alamo a little bit, had a awning like that, or the front of the house. And so we stayed there, and your brother was probably there, Marnetti and Don Haru and David Price. David's price to fame was he got a speeding ticket up there on the Iron Range. And that was the time when Kinney was seeking asylum or becoming their own territory. It was kind of a joke. But then David Price, he applied for political asylum in the town of Kinney, and the mayor granted it to him. And so it made national news, So, and that was around that era. We were all going to Mesabi, and it was a mystical, magical era, I think, of creating music. And, we were kind of buffoons. When we started the band, I didn't play that much guitar yet. And we had like Sharon Rowbottom could really sing, and Dan knew guitar. But we weren't as polished as the Cats Under the Stars. But we had some sacred clowns in the band, and I think that drew a lot of people who would come and see our antics. And, it was just a magical time, of songwriting and getting out there and having your dreams. And Mesabi Community College was part of that, the theater and everything was part of that magic and the steam that happened. I think the Schwartz brothers grew out of the theater department. And so there were actors and people like that in the band. And so part of our shows became visual in that sense. I remember tumbling across the stage during the song, the Tumbling Tumbleweeds. I would just tumble like a tumbleweed. I wouldn't do nothing else in it. But, we made entertainment like that. And it was a good place to cut your teeth, kind of, the good old Iron Range.
It's funny you should bring up Mesabi Junior College because, people these days don't know what a junior college was. I did 2 years there after high school. I referred to it in my book, Blue Guitar Highway, as high school with ashtrays. I'm glad you brought it up because speaking of hijinks, Cats Under the Stars did several performances there. They had 2 auditoriums, and I remember once we grabbed a prop and we wheeled Jack Pasternacki out in a shopping cart before the show. So I'm totally tracking with what you're saying there. Keith, tell us a little bit about before we get, I want to talk more about your Iron Range roots, but how did you hook up with Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead?
Well, that was kind of coming through. I think Garcia or somebody heard my song Indian Cars and liked that song Circle. And that was kind of parallel to, there was an ethnomusicologist called Thomas Venom, who is just he's an expert on Ojibwa music, on the Haiti dance drum, the voodoo drumming. And Tom was quite an ethnomusicologist. You know, he even did a little stint with Billie Holiday, but he's a jazz musician. And him and I would always play when I'd blow harp and he'd play piano out on Madeline Island. We'd do it for hours, just kind of changing keys and kind of following each other. And he became part of the Grateful Dead circle. You know, like Mickey and him worked on Planet Drums. There was an honor CD that put out by Ryko Disc. Tom and I did the A&R for it. We tracked down native songs and just turned them over to Mickey. And Mickey put them out under Ryko Disc. And that was preceded of Planet Drums. And so Mickey and I was aware, and Jared Garcia was aware of my music. And they started to play my song Indian Cars in side A of Circle in 93, 94, and part of 95. And so I got to know him that way. And then I got to know Jerry. I met him a couple times backstage and talked to him about music. And he was wonderful. You know, he was a very inspirational person to me. You know, he'd say, "Hey, sit down, Keith, man. I want to talk to you about music. You know, good music falls through the crack in America all the time, man. Your music's falling through the cracks. You keep on playing it, people will know about your music. Might take them 10, 20 years, but America's going to know." You know, like, and you know, he kind of gave me that inspiration to, music falls through the cracks all the time, you know, and same kind of thing. I'm playing the long game. And you are too, Paul. There's no guarantees we can play this long game, but it seems like our careers are just going upwards, and it continues happening. You're writing songs, I'm writing songs, and we're playing this long game in music. And so I met Mickey Hart through Thomas Venom, you know, and we produced an album for Mickey, and we're still. The last time they were around in town, Mickey, you know, invited me out, and now I work with his ex-manager, Howard Cohen, who I met through that whole connection with the Dead. And now Howard has his own management company, and I'm signed on to them. And kind of, it's a new thing for me to work with management. I got a little label that I work with. And I was such a freelance artist, I would do what I want to do probably ahead of any, you know, let's put it out there. And so now I kind of work with people, like say, no, we got to get the proper PR going and things. But it's all right. It's all kind of a new thing. And it's a good thing, because I think the biggest thing for an independent artist is how to get your music on the platforms so people can access it. You know, people would always say, "Hey, how do I buy Indian Cars?" And I'd say, "Well, you got to go to my website." And I didn't know, you know, all the streaming platforms that are out there. And so management and a record label will take care of some of that. So I can have more accessibility. And so I can concentrate, you know, on writing songs. And I record a lot in my home studio. You know, right now I got a microphone. I should have set up my interface with the mic, but you're catching the computer mic. And I have my piano on my right here, and I do a lot of home studio work. I call them audio sketches. Like I make an audio sketch, just like an artist would have a sketch pad or a sketchbook. You know, I sketch out the songs, and sometimes that's all they need is that, you know, a good song doesn't need much sometimes. And, you know, vocals and guitar, maybe bass. Sometimes I'll come up with the beats or something like that, and I'll make the beats, and sometimes not. But Yeah, audio sketching is the way to go for all artists, and something that we didn't have back in the day. In the day, it was like everybody was on labels, and it was almost impossible for a songwriter or an artist to have your music recorded unless you had some money and could go into a recording studio. Now it's very accessible, where people can record their own music, and I like that independent spirit. But at the same time, I love going into a studio too.
Keith, I want to address two things you said. First of all, I love what you said about the long game, because if we're lifers, this is what we do. And sometimes we make a living and sometimes we don't. But that doesn't stop the art. I remember when there was a re-release of my favorite Van Morrison record, St. Dominic's Preview. And Van wrote the liner notes, and he said, it doesn't matter what you've done. All that matters is that you are still around.
I believe that. Yeah, because music is two things. Either you're making it or you're not. And,
Right.
Like that's all it is,
I love the fact that you got your studio happening. I was going to do a project a few years ago with the great Ricky Peterson, keyboard player from the Peterson family, the majestic musical kings and queens of the Minneapolis music scene for years and years. And Ricky has played with everybody from Miles Davis to Robin Ford. He's Stevie Nicks' keyboard player. He also has been playing with Fleetwood Mac, but he's got his own studio at Creation Audio. And so we were going to do a project, and he said, Paul, do you have a studio in your basement? I said, no, I've got a cassette recorder on my kitchen table.
That's the way to go.
Yeah.
In the old days, you'd have two cassettes, so you could record on one, play it, and then record on another, and then you get a double tracking kind of thing going on.
Hey, I want to talk a little bit about you growing up on the Iron Range, but a woman that you had mentioned earlier that I think we really need to tell the world how good she is. Tell us a little bit about the great Sharon Rowbottom, who I went to from third grade, graduated high school with her, the funniest woman that ever grew up on the south side of Virginia. But talk about working with Sharon Rowbottom and her husband, Dan Boyer.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of love and respect. One of my first encounters was with Sharon. She was working at a music store in a Thunderbird Mall in Virginia. And I would come in there just kind of learning guitar, and I would go to them song notebooks, where they have the songs written out. And Sharon knew what I was doing, because I'd go in there without buying one, but I'd write on my notepad, the chords of a Neil Young song. And, she was kind of really cool like that. And then she knew that, this guy's coming in. We talk about music a lot. And then the opportunity through Tim Wright, I told Tim, let's start a band, and we hooked up with Dan Boyer and Steve Marnetti. And we kind of formed the beginning of the band. And then your brother, I knew you guys through, we'd come to Parkville a lot of times, and you're a friend with a family friend called the Paglicettis. And so I remember playing baseball with you, probably in sixth grade. We were playing in Parkville, Minnesota, which isn't there anymore. The mines ate it up. But we were playing right on the edge of 169, the longest highway in America. And we'd play baseball. And I remember meeting you and your brother. But then it was later that John and I were in the band, and we had a lot of fun together. John was nice enough to, when I didn't have an amp, he let me play through his twin. I'd play in one channel. I don't know if he liked it or not, but he allowed me to do it. And during the early days with the Schwartz brothers, Sharon was such a wonderful singer that I think we'd get gigs just because of her. I know we did. She could really sing the blues with soul and feeling. And we debuted the song Indian Cars on the main street of Virginia called the Pickwick. You remember the Pickwick?
Oh, I remember the Pickwick.
It was a strip bar at one time, and I think it was just transitioning at that point. But we played Indian Cars, and we played another song called Lord Help Us Sinners, 2 songs that I wrote, one about religion and one about ethnic natives. And the owner kind of came up to me and Sharon afterwards, and she liked the band, but she says, you can't play that Indian song. And Sharon stuck up for me. She more or less said, F off. We don't want to play here anymore. And that almost made me cry, like someone would do that. I did. I felt very emotional that Sharon would stick up for me like that and say, well, then, we could recognize prejudice where it was back then. I've been always too nice to people to say things, but she didn't hold back. And, that's when I knew, like, she's a winner, someone who's a really good friend. And we've remained that all this whole time. And I think she's still a mentor for me vocally when we go in the studio. Her and I talk a lot about the delivery, the cadence, about lyrics. And I still look to her for advice. And Dan Boyer, great guitarist, and he's a wonderful man to be around, fun.
Oh, they're both great. Well, I'm so glad we were able to talk about Sharon and Dan. We've got Keith Secola on for the whole show tonight. Tell us about this song, speaking about Native American-related subjects and songs. I listened to it last night. I fell in love with it. It's called Say Your Name. Tell us about the story behind that.
Okay, I was up in Winnipeg, Canada, and we were doing a show. And I noticed I got up early, to have coffee and walk around by the tributaries. That's where the concurrence of the Winnipeg River and the Red River come together, right up in Winnipeg. And Winnipeg's almost a central part of North America. But Native Americans call it Turtle Island. It's right in the heart of Turtle Island. And I noticed there was a crowd of people at this, like a convention place or a place where it had a big hall. And there was a big crowd of Native people. And I asked somebody, what's going on there? What's happening? And someone told me that Stephen Harper, who was the Prime Minister of Canada, had issued that they would have testimonials for people that were affected by boarding schools or parochial schools, Native Americans that were victimized by it, could come in and testify about it was a very traumatic and very ugly scene, like they would testify about what happened to them, and I sat outside of the convention center and I said, do I really want to go in there? I know it's going to be a ton of sadness. And, I thought back, well, what kind of songwriter wouldn't be, I should as an obligation to our people. And so I did go in there, and the first word I heard a woman testifying, she'd say the words, it would happen late at night. And from that word on, it would happen late at night. She described her molestation from the priest. And, and ironically, when she got married, when she was an adult, the same priest who molested her married her and her husband.
Wow.
And so the pedophiles could stay in the community without being exposed or known. And so there was one testimony after another with people telling their story. And I went back that night kind of saddened, and it was one of them songs where it immediately falls down, say your name. And, and I wrote it that night. The following morning, I went back there and I heard someone throwing up really hard. I thought, somebody had a rough night last night. But then when I came closer, it was one of the Cree medicine men. And he would pray over a victim. He put his hands on the victim's shoulder And afterwards he'd pray, he'd go to a tree, and he was throwing up. It was, wow, this is pretty intense. He's healing our people, but taking that medicine from that hurt and that trauma from that victim and releasing it into a tree. And he was throwing all the poison that he got from that soul. And so it was that kind of experience. And so I put it together really fast in the studio down here with a live drummer, and then I put a drum track to it. It's a neat effect on the drums. And we played all the instruments, and I put a flute on there. And then the people I'm working with, one of the artists, her husband worked for Pixar. And so they put the video together for me based on a child's book called Fatty Legs, about an Inuit woman who was put into parochial schools and her experience. And so Pixar put it together with that book. If you go to YouTube and listen to it, you can see the video. And I always say you lead people gently to a brutal truth. And that was that story of that song, but it came down one of the fastest songs. You go out on the road, you come home with a song, and the next day you're home, you go into the studio. It was like Johnny Cash says, are we going to record this long before we learn it? And that was what I did. I kind of didn't really know it that well yet, but kind of came simply, and if you look at the video, it's a powerful video, and it hardly can turn it around in one verse. But I didn't want to leave the people in Miseryville, so I want to leave them with hope and courage. And so the third verse is about the little girl going back to her Inuit roots and doing dog sledding, and her culture kind of healing her. And I believe in the quantum dreams of people. I believe that these little children who are part of victims went outside maybe at night and prayed to the heavens or didn't understand it all. But then 50 years later, these prayers come down on us, come down on the artist. And maybe that's where songs are born, the prayers of our children. And that's the story of Say Your Name.
Let's listen to a little bit of Say Your Name and then be back with the great Keith Secola on the Wall of Power Radio Hour.
Say your name, show your face, leave no trace of your shame. Tears come falling.
Welcome back to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metsa. I've been having a most enjoyable conversation with the man I've known for 5 decades, Mr. Keith Secola. Keith, we only got about 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask you 2 questions in one. First of all, tell us about a man who I saw at the Net Lake School, and when I was in junior high, became a huge hero of mine, Floyd Westerman. And then second, tell me how you became as a musician and human being when you really decided to embrace your Native American history and lineage and turn that into powerful music.
Yeah, Floyd and I became friends. I think I was at the University of Minnesota and I was playing music even back then. And Floyd came in and he was a guest artist for the Native American Culture Club student organization, and we had an evening concert. And so me and my friend went and picked Floyd up at the airport, and picked him up. And I had a nice Gibson guitar I said he could use. And he came over to our apartment and he was practicing a little bit. And I was practicing with him. And he goes, "Oh, man, you got to play with me tonight." And so to back him up. And that's how it kind of started at the University of Minnesota. And that was in the early 80s. And I think 79 or 80. And I backed up Floyd for that concert. And then we were friends ever since. I did a lot of shows with him. He'd hire me. And I think after that concert, he gave me a couple $100. That kind of lit the fire, too. I think that's the answer to your second question, like to write Native American activism. But I was really surprised, like, whoa, like this is great. And Floyd, the reason I got hired by him was he told me, like I could follow him. He's like an old blues artist. Maybe he'd come in on 2 or maybe he'd come in on 3, hardly ever on 1. But I'd wait for him, like he would start singing 1, 2, then the Antros couldn't. And he would start singing and I wouldn't count. I would count, but I would wait for him and follow him. And I think that's how I got the gig. So we started doing shows together. And his big quote was, he'd say, "Keith, I like your style, man. And back in our day, we would just kick them in the shin with truth." But he says, "But you're like a Pied Piper. You make them follow you. And then you tell them the truth in that way." And a little difference in the folk singers of the 60s and 70s, the folk singers of the 2020s, 2020s, kind of let people follow you and lead them gently to a brutal truth, let them metaphysically come to the self-realization, because I think that's where real change is, where people kind of come to that metaphysical truth through their own metaphors and dialogue and realize and start asking questions. And that's when I knew writing about my heritage and lineage and our culture, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe culture, was very important, and when I wrote the song NDN Cars, I noticed a lot of performers would just kind of salt and pepper their song, maybe have Indian singers at the beginning and at the end. And so I wanted something intrinsic. So NDN Cars became that, the melodies and the chants were intrinsically part of the song. And I think that's what people realized at the Guild of Music Supervisors, that this is rock and roll and this is Native Americana. And that's what the genre that we're part of creating. And so those things became important to me. Now as a songwriter, I write the song where it's hit, where the pitch is pitched. I noticed that was the key to a good baseball player, is being able to hit the ball where the pitch is pitched. And so if it comes out as a Native type song, usually they're songs of hope and people and love and understanding. And so, and like Woody Guthrie says, I want to write happy songs, songs that make people feel good. And that's why, it's a tight balance. On one hand, you don't want to be an angry Indian. And on the other hand, you don't want to be a Disneyland Indian either and think that everything's all right. So that wire is the wire you cross. They talk about a rainbow bridge that you could cross from the Catalina Islands to the mainstream to LA. And they said you could cross that bridge if you didn't look down. And if you look down, you'd fall into the ocean and become a dolphin. And that's what I do. I cross this rainbow bridge. Just don't look down and keep your faith and faith. And so that's kind of what I'm still doing, the belief in the richness of being poor, the belief in something that isn't there, the thin spots in America, the axis mundis, them kind of places.
Well, that is very well said, Keith Secola. He's got 4 shows coming up in northern Minnesota. Go to KeithSecola.com to find out where they are. We're going to end with a really cool song called Dino Parmesan, also called Amore by Keith Secola. Keith, I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks so much for your time tonight.
Okay, come and sit in with us if you do any place, okay?
Absolutely.
Dino Parmesan waltzes into the ballroom. He sprinkles Parmesan all over the dance floor. He says it helps him glide and slide and dance and sing amore. Dino Parmesan.
Thanks for listening to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. The show is produced by Paul Metsa, engineered by Brett Johnson. We'd like to thank our guest, Keith Secola, for a most amazing conversation. You could follow me at paulmetsa.com. I am releasing my new record, Songs of Resistance and Resolve. You can stream for free and download at paulmetsa.com. If you'd like to make a little donation to my work, you can track me down at Venmo at Paul-Metsa. And like my dad used to tell me, remember to be kind and make someone happy.
There will be no power broker